All right, let's talk about one of the most unbelievable stories in business history, the 1988 takeover of RJR Nabisco. This wasn't just a deal. It was an all-out war on Wall Street, fueled by staggering amounts of greed, ego, and pure ambition.
Yeah, I know. It's a pretty wild combination, right? Oreos and cigarettes? But to really get how a company like this became the prize in a massive corporate brawl, we have to start with the guy who was running the whole show. So our story really kicks off with this larger-than-life CEO, his gigantic company, and one big problem that would light the fuse on an absolute battle for control.
Okay, so picture this. It's the 1980s, and RJR Nabisco is an absolute behemoth. And it's built on this completely bizarre mix of products. On one hand, you've got wholesome snacks like Oreos. On the other, R.J. Reynolds cigarettes. And the man in charge of all of it was the incredibly charismatic, fast-talking CEO F. Ross Johnson.
You know, this quote from the man himself, it just says it all. Ross Johnson was a salesman through and through. He was famous for being ridiculously casual with the company's money. We're talking Rolexes for everyone, insane parties, and a fleet of private jets for his top guys, which they actually called the RJR Air Force.
But here's the thing. Even with all this cash pouring in, Johnson was getting really annoyed. Because to him, a stock price that's just sitting there was like a personal insult. It felt like Wall Street wasn't giving him the credit he deserved.
Johnson thought he had the perfect solution, his big secret weapon, a brand new smokeless cigarette called Premier. He dumped hundreds of millions of dollars into it, telling everyone it would completely change the game. The only catch? Well, as the first people who tried it said, it tasted, and this is a direct quote, like shit. The whole thing was a total epic failure.
So his brilliant idea had literally gone up in smoke, and honestly, his job was probably on the line. So Johnson scrambled, and he turned his attention to this really controversial new financial weapon that was taking over Wall Street.
He decided to go for what's called a leveraged buyout, or an LBO. This was a super high risk, but potentially super high reward, way to take a public company private by basically burying it in debt. Think about it like this. You borrow just an insane amount of cash to buy up every single share of a company. Then, as soon as you own it, you start slashing costs, selling off divisions, anything to generate cash. And here's the crazy part. The goal is to use the company's own money to pay back the loans you took out to buy it in the first place.
So Johnson was totally sold on this LBO plan. It was his way out, his way to fix the stock problem, and let's be honest, save his own job. But the very first move he made would turn out to be a colossal, catastrophic mistake.
See, Johnson actually learned all about LBOs from the king of the LBO himself, Henry Kravis, from the legendary firm KKR. But instead of working with Kravis, Johnson basically blew him off, took the idea and ran to a rival bank to do the deal. Kravis was furious. He felt betrayed, like Johnson had stolen his playbook. He was not about to let that happen. He immediately launched his own bid. And just like that, the war for RJR Nabisco was on. Johnson's team came out swinging with an offer of $75 a share. Pretty good, right? But Kravis, who was now running on pure pride and revenge, just came right over the top with a stunning counteroffer of $90 a share. And in that moment, everyone on Wall Street smelled blood in the water. The whole thing became the biggest story in the financial world. Other big players started circling, including a rival financier named Ted Forstmann. And he's the one who famously screamed about these debt-heavy firms like KKR, calling them barbarians at the gate. And you know what? The name stuck.
And look, Forstmann wasn't just being dramatic. These LBO deals had a really dark side. All that pressure to pay down that mountain of debt, it often meant companies were torn apart, with the biggest cost being massive layoffs. KKR had just recently taken over the Safeway grocery store chain, for instance, and thousands of people lost their jobs. So as the price tag for this deal climbed into the tens of billions, the public was just captivated. But the one detail that was going to completely sink Ross Johnson's chances, well, it had nothing to do with spreadsheets or stock prices. It all came down to pure, uncut greed. Word started to leak to the press about the deal that Johnson had structured for himself and his management team. And this one number, $2.5 billion, it just created an absolute firestorm. This was the potential payout for Johnson and his inner circle if they won. Now, this wasn't just some crazy bonus.
This figure represented a huge piece of the actual company, equity that Johnson and his team were going to get for putting up basically none of their own money. The public was absolutely furious. But you know who was even more furious? The company's own board of directors.
So it all comes down to this insane, frantic finish. Both sides throw in their final, sealed bits. And when the dust settles, believe it or not, Ross Johnson's team actually had the highest offer, a mind-blowing $112 per share.
But it didn't matter. The board was so disgusted, so betrayed by what they saw as Johnson's unbelievable greed that they rejected his higher offer. In a move that shocked everyone, they awarded the company to Henry Kravis and KKR for their lower bid of $109 a share. The final price tag was $25 billion, the biggest takeover in history.
And just like that, the war was over. The Barbarians were officially inside the gates. But what happened to everyone involved? And what did this whole crazy fight really leave behind?
Well, Ross Johnson lost the company, sure. But hey, don't feel too sorry for the guy. He was forced out, but he walked away with a golden parachute that was worth an incredible $53 million.
But the real legacy of this deal was so much bigger than any one person's paycheck. The RJR Nabisco takeover became the ultimate symbol of 1980s corporate greed. The sheer scale and the raw drama of it all put a massive critical spotlight on how Wall Street operated. It was really the peak of that first LBO craze, and it completely changed how the public saw the world of high finance. And that's really the question at the heart of this whole thing, isn't it? It's the exact dilemma the RJR Nabisco board was facing. They chose to punish what they saw as outrageous greed, even though it cost their shareholders money. And it leaves us with this fascinating question that's just as relevant today. What's the real price of ambition? And where exactly do you draw the line?